Now, in a way, it seems a little odd to come to Stanford Law School because Stanford Law School is obviously in a relatively unique position with two other law schools in regard to its hierarchical status and the employment prospects of its students, and remains relatively insulated in regard to the crisis that is overwhelming American legal academia in general. However, I certainly am not here to criticize Stanford Law School. If I had any plans on doing that, I was so overwhelmed by the majesty of the surroundings when I got here that any such thoughts were immediately quashed. So instead, what I'd like to do is to talk about the general structural situation in legal academia and then say a few things touching on perhaps the special role that I do believe Stanford has to play in regard to doing something about that situation. So the questions I'm going to address very quickly are how much does it cost to go to law school? How much educational debt are current law students incurring? What do current employment and salary outcomes look like? And why does law school cost so much? And then finally, if there's time, I might address the question of what can be done. But maybe that can come out more in the dialogic portion. Okay, very important point in regard to all the numbers I'm going to repeat here. I'm going to speak strictly in terms of current 2011 dollars. Okay, these are all inflation-adjusted numbers, which is something I often have to repeat in this kind of context because the numbers are so incredible when stated that way that people just kind of refuse to believe that that could be the case. But when I say something like, for instance, Harvard Law School's tuition in 1971 was $12,500, that means $12,500 in 2011 dollars. In nominal dollars, it was $2,100. Okay, so I'm adjusting for inflation. Well, Harvard's tuition in 1971 was $12,500. In 1981, it was $15,600. In 1991, $26,000. 2001, $35,200. Today, $47,600. So it's essentially quadrupled over the course of 40 years, and it's doubled in real terms over the course of the last 20 years. Harvard's tuition is essentially the same as that of other elite private law schools, who are all well, not needless to say, conspiring with each other, but at least paying close attention, shall we say, to what their tuition levels are. The situation in terms of public law schools is in some ways even more distressing. Public legal education in America is essentially coming to an end. In 1985, median annual resident tuition at American public law schools was $3,500. I actually went to Michigan Law School instead of Stanford because I could go to Michigan for $9,000 a year in 2011 dollars instead of the $23,000 a year in 2011 dollars that would cost to go to Stanford at that time. I hope I haven't lived to regret the error, but there you have it. I'm one of the people who went to public law school because it was relatively inexpensive. Today, it's nearly $18,000, probably actually over $18,000 in 2011, a median resident tuition at public law schools. So it is more than quintupled in real terms over the course of the last 25 years. Just to give you a few examples, again, all of this in inflation-adjusted dollars. Just in the last 15 years, Illinois has gone from $7,000 to $40,000. Minnesota from almost $12,000 to $35,000. University of Colorado from $6,000 to $31,000. Just in 15 years, etc. A couple of macroeconomic points. The median household income in the United States, inflation adjusted at 1970, was $48,332. It's the same today. It's $49,000 and change. So median household income in the United States has not changed in the last 40 years. During that time, law school tuition has quadrupled at private schools and increased by a factor of nearly 10 at public schools. So this, of course, has just enormous consequences for the sorts of people who can go to law school and also the debt loads that they take on. And what are those debt loads? Well, the current 1L class at ABA accredited law schools in the United States is going to graduate with about $150,000 of educational debt, median, when it graduates. That's a product of the fact that median law school debt for the class that just graduated was slightly over $100,000. Tuition increases that happen well above inflation rates are baked into the cake already for the people who are going to be graduating in 2013. I got an email from a 3L at Duke last night who told me that Duke is setting its tuition next year at $51,000. It's raised its tuition by 4.5%, which which is significantly above the inflation rate, at a time when about 30% of the class at Duke is having trouble getting a job, which is a shocking statistic that nobody believes, but like when you actually start investigating what's going on to the people who are graduating even from these elite law schools, that is in fact the situation. So the classes that are currently 1Ls are going to graduate with about $125,000 of law school debt and probably around, on average, $25,000 of undergraduate debt. So there's a total of $150,000 debt. Debt is high interest, as you know, 6.8% on Stafford loans, 7.9% on Grad Plus loans. Extremely high interest in this, in a low interest environment in general, and non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. So, what are the consequences of having this kind of debt under these kinds of economic conditions? Well, what are the economic conditions? 58% of the people who graduated from ABA accredited law schools in 2010 had a full-time job that required a JD 9 months after graduation. That sounds, I think, pretty bad. But that number is actually an enormous exaggeration. Why? Because here's what counts as a full-time job that requires a law degree. Temporary work. If you were doing a 6-week document review requiring 40 hours per week during the middle of February, 9 months after graduation, you have a full-time job that requires a JD. Because one of the curiosities of document review is that even though the work is for the most part clerical, it's billed out to clients at rates that are charged on the basis of the fact that attorneys are doing it. Jobs that feature nominal or completely non-existent salaries. It used to be thought that having a job meant you got paid. That is increasingly not the case in the American legal profession. And this isn't just for like little firms that are taking advantage of the desperate situation of recent law graduates. The U.S. Attorney's Office around the country is now hiring people for a full year for in a job, what they call a job, for an entire year with a salary of 0. And what they're saying is, well, come work for us for a year. It's true we won't pay you. And also, by the way, you're not qualified to be eligible for a permanent position at the U.S. Attorney's Office for at least 5 years afterwards. So there's no getting your foot in the door, at least immediately here. But you'll get great experience, and it'll look great on your resume. But you won't have there's the one downside is there's no salary involved, which for some people could be problematic. Not for others. You can probably figure out what the distinction would be there in regard to the people who it would be problematic for and who it wouldn't be for. Jobs invented by law schools to pump up putative employment rates. This category included more than 4% of all jobs reported by 2010 graduates, and that percentage has clearly gone up quite a bit just in the last year. 11% of the University of Virginia's 2010 class was hired by the University of Virginia, the #9 ranked law school in the country. 40 people out of 370. In, of course, short-term positions paying low wages for the purposes of making it appear that 11% of the UVA class wasn't completely unemployed. Unsustainable forms of self-employment. Nearly 1/3 of 2010 law graduates who listed themselves as employed full-time in a position requiring a law degree were either in solo practices or in quote-unquote firms of 2 to 10 employees. Many of the latter positions consist of a couple of new grads opening up a law office and trying to make a go of it in a hyper-saturated market in which they naturally have almost no idea what they're doing, because the whole practicing law thing, not to mention the whole running a small business of your own thing, wasn't really covered in the course of their legal education. So perhaps 10,000 out of 44,000 ABA law school grads in 2010 were earning $63,000 or more 9 months after graduation. 10,000 out of 44,000 in an environment where the median debt is soon going to be, it's close to already, but will be $150,000, i.e. requiring $11,000 a month, a year in interest payments alone. Well, what about elite schools, though, you're thinking? I mean, obviously, here we are, Stanford, it's beautiful, Palo Alto, everything's great. I noticed that the faculty can see from their offices this beautiful bucolic garden, that's like there, quiet with the fountains, and you could just see a Chinese emperor just sort of sitting there and listening, to a wise bird singing a song or something, and Yeats writing a poem about it or something. So it's kind of hard to picture that things could be problematic, really. I mean, I have to say, even being here for like an hour, I kind of felt less. I started mellowing out a little bit. I said, maybe it's not so bad, I'll have some sushi or something, and I'll just, maybe I've been exaggerating. Seriously, this does happen when you're immersed in a highly, in a beautiful and privileged atmosphere, you start becoming a beautiful, privileged person. Well, not always, but what's happening at the elite law schools? I've come up with a little statistic that I call high status employment law placement, HELP, which is calculated as people getting jobs with firms that pay six-figure salaries, mainly NLJ 250 firms, but also a few boutique firms that pay those kinds of salaries. Article 3 clerkships, prestigious government jobs, and dedicated public interest LRAP students who were going that route from the beginning. How many people are getting? So these I think it's fair to say pretty much encapsulates what would be considered an acceptable employment outcome for most people going to certainly to an elite law school. That's kind of the whole point, right? The whole point of going to an elite law school is you can get those kinds of jobs. And also that you can go to a school that has a real LRAP program, a real loan repayment assistance program, which most law schools just don't. They either have a nominal one or none at all. A place like Stanford can actually support its people who are going to go do public interest work, which is extremely important. Anyways, bottom line, how many people are graduating from elite law schools right now with really an acceptable employment outcome from an ex ante perspective? Here are the numbers. Columbia, 64.5%. We don't have enough time, so I'm not going to go into disaggregating the statistics. Feel free to contact me if you want to know how exactly I put these numbers together. Chicago, 59%. NYU, 53%. Michigan, my alma mater, a place where if you didn't get a big firm job, and you had to go work for, the federal government or something, that was considered, quite problematic when I was a student 25 years ago. 47.48%. Georgetown, 41%. Georgetown graduates 650 people a year because they take 100 transfer students every year. Probably didn't know that, right? It's a giant factory, essentially, in a completely saturated market. DC. Texas, 34.47%. George Washington, the number 20 ranked law school in the country. Now, I realize that from Stanford, George Washington might seem like, a couple of parsecs away, like far away. But it's not very far in the law school hierarchy. It's in the 90th percentile among ABA accredited schools, right? 26%, right? Cost of attendance at George Washington right now, $225,000 and going up rapidly. Okay, how much? I've taken like 15 minutes, 5 more minutes, and then we can, Professor Rhode respond, and we can have some general conversation. How has this happened? Faculty costs have gone through the roof because of a combination of increased pecuniary and non-pecuniary compensation. That's a significant factor. Numbers from Michigan. In the early 1980s, the highest paid professors on the Michigan faculty were making about $170,000 a year. The dean was making $175,000. Again, all in current 2011 dollars. Today, the dean makes $447,000. The senior faculty make $350,000. Entry-level people make more now on the Michigan faculty than the dean made 30 years ago. And, by the way, more than starting associates at the biggest law firms in the country, which is a complete reversal of the situation 30 years ago when the associates at similar firms made 40% more than entry-level faculty people at Michigan. Meanwhile, a generation ago, the typical teaching load at elite law schools was 4 classes a year. At other schools, it was 5 to 6. Today, the situation is it's 4 at at second-tier schools. It's 3 at the top 50. It's, I suspect, more like functionally 2 at the most elite schools. Meanwhile, the conditions of work have gotten vastly more pleasant. Even when I started teaching, not that, well, 20 years ago now, people, hand wrote their exams, which was a huge pain, right? You had these big classes and everybody's scrawling these blue books, and you couldn't read them, and it was hard. It was like working in a coal mine, basically, right? Today, everybody,